The events unfold in the lands of Asura, a world of gods and sorcerers. The interaction of technology and magic further advances the development of the continent. However, 1,000 years ago, strange demons appeared and destroyed the harmony of the continent. The war between demons and wizards quickly escalated, destroying this world. Only a century later, the ambassadors of God, with the help of magical elements, sealed the unearthly beings. After thousands of years, the seal has clearly weakened and a new catastrophe is approaching. The darkness is returning. In the last war, the gods helped seal the demons. For example, the god of the seas, who controls the elements of the seas. The beautiful goddess, who controlled the elements of nature, joined him. The god of heaven entered the fray with all his forces. The mysterious god of the earth element provided them with support. The god of the element of fire, together with his fire guard, openly entered into battles. The god of the hurricane element, with the support of his brothers, created unimaginable storms. The god who controlled the element of thunder also took part in the battles, but they all fell long ago. The main character of this story, Yahello, became the successor of the god of the sea elements, although the former Poseidon was fooled. However, Yahello hid his power from others in order to study peacefully at the Asura Academy. But all this time he was not alone. A ghost named Shields actively helped him deal with the various problems that came to his door. The guy, surprisingly, had a lot of problems. For example, he had to deal with an angry girl who controlled the violent elements. The blonde sent lightning and thunder at him, but Yahello managed to get out of this situation. On another such occasion, the boy ran into a young man who was also angry with Yahello for some reason. The guy controlled the element of fire and threatened the guy with death. Having encountered both a boy and a girl at the same time, Yahello was completely at a loss. He could only stand aside and prepare to attack. Enemies could control spirits in knightly armor. A moment came to Yahello's mind when he helped someone. At that moment he was clearly trying to help, but he could no longer remember his face exactly. Yahello created a sphere of water and addressed it, calling on it to respond to him. We are transported back in time. An owl sits on a tree branch in a dark forest and watches something intently. The bird silently soared into the sky. The night darkness was illuminated only by the bright full moon. The bird flew towards the large castle belonging to the Asura Academy. That night, Yahello did not sleep, but was in the library, collecting the books he needed. The guy picked up another book and quickly leafed through it. However, it was just another book that didn't suit him, so he threw it aside. Yahello looked through a huge number of books, but still couldn't find the one he needed. At some point, the guy came across a volume that was lying separately from the others. Yahello took it in his hands and turned it over, examining it from all sides. The boy ran his hand over the cover and realized that the book was sealed with magic. Yahello immediately realized that he was dealing with first-class magic, but he still decided to try to remove the seal. The guy raised his hand up, and at that very moment, thin streams of water began to flow around his fingers. The streams crossed each other and formed a sea seal. The guy quickly ran his hand across the cover in a crisscross pattern, trying to remove the seal. Thicker streams surrounded the book and began to dance around it in a kind of dance. However, the seal did not give in and sent an electric shock through the water. Feeling pain, Yahello removed his hand from the book, realizing that he would not be able to remove the seal. However, after some time, the guy noticed that the seal gradually began to dissipate. Through the subtle streams of energy, Yahello saw a drawing surrounded by ancient symbols. The boy looked at the book in surprise and did not understand how it could have ended up in school. Lost in his thoughts, the boy didn't notice how a hand reached out from behind him. Ghost shields touched the guy, thereby scaring him. Out of fear, Yahello even dropped the book and shouted at the girl not to appear so unexpectedly. Shields ignored his comment, and then the guy asked why she wasn't blowing wind outside. The girl replied that the guy stood in the same place all the time, so she got tired of waiting. Yahello realized he had really taken too long to find her, and then Shields said she would give him another 10 minutes. The guy apologized and thanked the girl, but as soon as she left the library, he breathed a sigh of relief. Yahello was thinking that he had become too engrossed in the book about the castle, which had caused him to waste a lot of time. The guy didn't notice how a huge snake approached him from behind. The only thing that caught Yahello's attention was the dark fog flowing across the library floor. The guy touched it with his hand and noted that the fog was very viscous, which is why it easily stuck to his hand. At the last moment, Yahello noticed movement behind him and jumped to the side. The guy looked in surprise at the monster that appeared out of nowhere. The brunette made a few more jumps back, increasing the distance between them. The boy watched the snake carefully, ready to defend himself at any moment. The thought entered the guy's head that the snake was brought here by a book with a seal. Yahello tried to figure out how to get out of this situation. Shields was guarding the library entrance at the time, but her attention was drawn to the fog seeping through the door. The girl immediately realized that they were dealing with dark magic. Shields immediately became concerned about Yahello, who was alone in the library at the time. The next moment, the girl saw a light in one of the corridors and realized that someone was walking towards the library. Meanwhile, Yahello carefully examined the snake that had appeared. She had bright pink eyes, matching the color of the magical seal on the book. Yahello turned his attention to the book that was floating in the air near the snake. The guy suggested that the snake was the black magic that was sealed in this book. Yahello wondered if the snake could have been an ordinary illusion. The monster got tired of waiting, so he rushed forward, opening his mouth full of teeth. Yahello used water elemental magic again, and this time the streams of water became more violent. The water formed a kind of shield around the boy, which the snake was unable to penetrate. The snake looked at Yahello with displeasure, not understanding why its attack had failed. Enraged, the monster struck him with its tail several times, forcing the guy to jump aside. At that moment, Shields' head poked through the wall and announced that an inspector was moving in their direction. The girl said that they should retreat immediately. However, Shields was stunned when she saw the giant snake. Yahello realized that they had to speed up to avoid being caught by the inspector. The boy created a seal and addressed the elves living in the ocean. He called upon them to awaken from the cracks in the abyss and come to his call. After this, Yahello threw a water spear at the snake. The snake opened its mouth in surprise, watching what was happening. The next moment, the spear pierced the monster's head, bringing victory to its owner. At this point, the battle was over, but the guy still had to hide from the inspector. The heavy-set man with the mustache was now approaching closer and closer, as he heard some voices ahead. The inspector stopped near reading room number 3, since that was where he had heard the voices. Shields heard a man approaching the door and asking if anyone was there. The girl told Yahello to hurry, because the inspector could come in at any moment. The guy said that he understood everything, and began to call upon the power of the seas. The streams slowly surrounded him from all sides. They began to absorb him, as if dissolving his body into themselves. A few moments later, the boy turned into water and rushed in different directions, crawling around the library. At that moment, the inspector entered the reading room and said that late visits to the library always had to be arranged in advance. However, in front of him the man saw complete devastation. Shelves and books overturned on the floor. The inspector had no words to describe what he saw. He didn't understand how all this could happen. The inspector did not notice how water was making its way along the walls behind him and flowing out of the reading room. Returning to the history of this world, we can say that once the country of Asura was pure, and people and spirits lived together. Gods and sorcerers who helped the country develop huddled next to them. However, 1,000 years ago, a clan of demons suddenly attacked their lands, which caused a war between demons and sorcerers. Many powerful sorcerers and high-level spirits united to confront the demons. Although the demon army was held back from spreading, the battle did not reach a stalemate. Thus began the 100 Years' War, until the first magic academy of the country of Askar was founded. This is the academy where Yahello is currently studying. However, at the moment his thoughts are occupied with pleasant dreams. The teacher told the students that the academy united all the country's defensive structures. The man noticed the sleeping boy and raised his wand, continuing his lecture. The next moment he pointed the wand with the snake jumping out of it towards Yahello. The boy woke up from the professor's loud, disgruntled cry. As soon as he raised his head from the desk, a snake bit his face. While Yahello was tearing the snake off himself, the professor asked the boy if he wanted to tell them all about the first big event at the academy after its founding. The boy looked at the man with sleepy eyes and did not understand what they wanted from him. The professor asked if the history of magic was like a lullaby, and warned that he would throw the student out into the hallway if he fell asleep in his class again. Yahello rubbed his eyes and thought that people who do their work at night don't need a lullaby. The professor continued his lecture, saying that the demons had been sealed until this day, restoring order to the earth. At the end of the lecture, the teacher still punished Yahello for sleeping in class. The guy stood by the walls and thought that it was because of the demons sealed by the talisman that he was in Askar. The guy was in a terrible mood. He barely slept, and he also became a laughingstock in the eyes of other students. Students passing by openly laughed at the fact that even Yahello's cloak was taken away. The guy blamed everything that happened on a huge snake that suddenly appeared in the library at night. Yahello's attention was drawn to Shield's voice as she swam up to him, laughing at the boy. The girl straightened her hair and said that it was very annoying to see the guy punished. Shields leaned over and asked if she should go back and tell Grandpa Hay and the others. Yahello said that the girl had no right to say such a thing, since it was Hayu's grandfather who put him in such a situation that forced him to go to the academy. Shields placed her hands on the guy's shoulders and said that there was nothing to worry about, because he always had a powerful spirit partner in her. Despite her supportive speeches, the girl understood that their most important task was to find the reason for the weakening of the talisman. Shields knew they would have to face an unknown enemy. However, she must protect Yahello with all her might. The girl suggested forgetting what she had just said, but the guy was no longer in front of her. Yahello had already stepped aside and was thinking about how the same drawing always appeared on the seal. Shields jumped on the boy's back and ordered him not to ignore her, but Yahello explained his behavior by saying that the bell for class had already rung. The girl said that Yahello should not behave like this, because he is the only acting ruler and bearer of the title of ruler of the seas. Shield said the boy has the ability to ride the waves, summon the life of the seven seas, and even the beasts of the abyss will hear his call. Hilo just waved her off and said that right now he was only thinking about the seal. The girl asked whether the guy really saw the seal sign, or if he imagined it. Hilo said that there could be no mistake, as he had seen this sign before on a sealed book in Grandfather Hai's collection. Shield said the seal once plunged the country's secret organization into chaos, as all actions were suspicious, and traces were left all over the country. Hilo said that everything connected with this disappeared without a trace after the war. The girl asked the guy if he thought the seal had anything to do with the weakening of the talisman. Hilo replied that this could very well be true. The boy believed that Grandfather Hai's guesses must be correct. During his stay at this academy, Hilo felt that it had already been imbued with an unknown power. At that moment, a snake with red eyes was sitting on a branch outside the window, carefully watching the students. When classes were over, Hilo went outside for a walk. Shields accompanied him everywhere, remaining invisible to the other students. The girl got tired of flying around the guy in her big guise, so she decided to transform. With a little strain, the girl turned into a cat with her paws bandaged. Shields wagged her tail and remarked that being in human form was much more comfortable. The cat jumped onto Hilo's shoulders and asked if he still thought about that seal. The guy said that the appearance of this seal within the walls of the academy indicates that it is connected with her. However, Hilo has not been studying at this academy for very long, so he will not be able to obtain enough useful information. As Shields listened to the boy's story, she sniffed him. The cat looked at Hilo and said that he smelled unusual today. Shields said he didn't have that smell yesterday. At that moment, a voice came from behind, demanding that everyone move aside and make way for Miss Cindy. Hilo turned around with interest to find out in whose honor such a commotion was being caused. The boy saw a carriage from which two students were driving away the rest of the students. When there was enough space, the passengers got out of the carriage. They were a girl and a boy who had the same golden hair and eyes. Shields asked who this Cindy was that such a large crowd had gathered around her. Hilo had already heard of this girl named Cindy Sandal. The guy said that she is a member of the student council of Asura Academy. Cindy was none other than the vice president. The girl walked ahead of everyone and, approaching the main entrance to the academy, stopped. Cindy looked up at the huge building. The sharp peaks of the palace seemed to pierce the sky itself. For a while, the girl froze in front of the entrance, and no one dared to distract her. It seemed as if the girl was angry. Cindy clenched her fists tightly, attracting the attention of her golden-haired companion, Victor. However, in her heart, the girl was happy that she would finally be able to meet her little sister. Cindy thought that her sister missed her very much and couldn't wait to see her. The girl's cheeks turned red, but she still couldn't hold back a smile. Cindy flinched when she felt Victor's gaze on her. The girl pulled herself together and said that it was time to make the first report to the director of the academy on the results of the inspection of their branches. Cindy looked at the tower where the director should have been and thought that this old man must have leaked some unnecessary information, which almost led to the failure of their mission. The girl thought that if it weren't for her sister, she would have skinned the director and fed him to the animals long ago. Suddenly, Cindy was distracted by a strange smell. The girl looked around the crowd of students surrounding her and determined which direction the smell was coming from. However, Hilo had already lost interest and began to move away from the crowd. Shields suggested the guy try to get closer to the vice president to get more information. The cat advised the boy to fake his identity and infiltrate the student council. Hilo immediately dismissed the idea, saying that the council members were always in public and Grandpa Hai had told them to keep a low profile. The guy reminded them that in a sense they had violated the law on boundaries that had been established after the Great Demon War. All gods and spirits were forced to sign a treaty that prohibited them from leaving their historical lands. Hilo was a man who became a god, so this created an accidental hole in the system. Hilo didn't notice that Cindy had been looking for him in the crowd all this time, and had now caught up with him, demanding that he stop. The guy stopped and asked in surprise if the girl was talking to him. Cindy came closer, causing Shields to hide behind Hilo's shoulder in fear. The blonde sniffed the guy carefully. Cindy realized that there was no mistake, and that this strange smell was coming from this particular student. The girl asked if the guy was new to the academy. Hilo stuttered and answered in the affirmative. Cindy looked the guy over carefully for a while, making him feel uncomfortable. The girl walked towards the entrance and told Hilo to follow her into the meeting room. The guy wanted to ask why he should do this, but Cindy beat him to it, saying that he couldn't refuse. Meanwhile, in the demonic space, the demons were playing chess. Coiled around one of them was the snake that had previously watched over Hilo. For a while, the space was filled only with the sound of figures hitting the field. The snake crawled up to the cloaked demon's face and whispered something in his ear. After this, the snake crawled into the hood and disappeared from sight. The blue-feathered demon in the mask said that their family's little miss, Sandal, had found a newcomer hiding in the library. His opponent in the red mask said that the Sandal family had caused them a lot of problems. and this newcomer with an unknown past could hinder them. The demon believed that their actions might be limited due to the appearance of these two students. The cloaked demon reassured his brothers, saying that there was no need to worry about them. He did everything to ensure that the scent was imprinted on the newcomer, so now all they can do is wait. The demon was sure that soon Sandal and the newcomer would start fighting against each other, ignoring them. Meanwhile, Cindy took Yahello to the Asura Academy's meeting room. The girl, while still on the street, sensed the aura of the seal emanating from the guy, so she suspected that he might be somehow connected with demons. Now, Cindy wanted to know if the guy had come into contact with the seal. The girl recalled the events of 3 days ago. That day, they were with student council representatives on a tour of the academy's branches. Late at night, they encountered strange people, which led to a fight. These people were surprised that the girl had been following them for so long. They were dressed in robes and masks that covered their faces. The two were clearly up to no good, so Cindy chased them. 2 unknown individuals climbed the high tower of the academy's branch to increase the distance between them and the girl. Cindy was clearly angry as the lightning continued to surround her, lighting up the night with bright flashes. The strangers asked if their little journey had really disturbed Mrs. Sandal. The girl looked at them angrily and said that they talked too much. At that moment, a large chain, glowing with golden light and surrounded by lightning, burst out of the smokescreen. The chain rushed towards the strangers, intending to wrap itself around them. However, one of the opponents waved his hand, repelling the chain with dark streams of energy. The chain retreated a little, but soon rushed forward again with great force. Cindy just smiled at this. The chain surrounded the dark barrier, trapping the unknown in the center of their own shelter. However, this only caused laughter from the enemy. One of them looked towards the owner of the chains and said that things were only getting more interesting. The chains came from the man who had been sitting in the shadows until now, surrounded by dust from Cindy's attack. It turned out to be Victor, accompanying Miss Sandal. The strangers said that Mrs. Sandal rarely honored anyone with her presence, but they must still take their leave. The girl clearly didn't like this. She said that they couldn't just leave and ordered Victor to act. The boy pulled the chain harder, causing the lightning to flow through it with greater force. However, the enemy's dark barrier held back the lightning. The masked strangers said goodbye. After this, an explosion occurred, after which the dark barrier disappeared and the chains closed. After a few moments, it became clear that the opponents had disappeared. Victor looked at Cindy and wanted to say something to her. However, the girl said that none of this mattered, because the most important thing was that they were able to stop them. After that, the guy and the girl returned to the main academy, and at that moment, Cindy called Yahello for a talk. The girl was alarmed by the fact that the seal had already penetrated some of the students during her absence. Cindy closed the curtains and asked the student's name. After this, the girl sat down on the sofa with a mug of tea and asked about the purpose of Yahello's visit to the academy. The boy was worried that his identity might be revealed. Yahello decided to play dumb and said that he came to the academy to practice his magic because there were many more opportunities here. Cindy put the cup on the table and said that the guy, of course, would not tell her everything honestly. The girl turned her gaze to her companion and ordered him to act. Victor moved away from the door where he had been standing all this time. Yahello noticed him the moment the boy snapped his fingers. The next moment, the room was filled with lightning, and a pentagram formed on the floor. Yahello immediately realized that he was dealing with a high-level magical barrier, and the room was completely blocked. A stream of golden energy crossed the room. It came from Cindy's wand and spread throughout the room. After a few moments, streams of energy formed silhouettes next to the girl. Cindy said that since the guy was not going to tell the truth, she would ask him to die. This concentration of energy caused thunderclouds to form over the academy. This caught the attention of a girl with green hair who saw it from the window and immediately realized that Cindy was involved. At that moment, a student burst into the room of the girl, who turned out to be the chairwoman, and said that they had a problem. The girl reported that Ms. Sandal was bullying a new student. The chairwoman put the books aside and said that she already knew everything. She looked at the sky, which was filled with storm clouds. At that moment, the golden knights created by Cindy began to attack Yahello. They struck one blow after another. Yahello had to dodge, as he had no other way to escape. Having dodged another blow, the boy noticed another knight approaching from behind. This time, Yahello also managed to avoid the collision. The guy rested his hand on the floor and turned around. He kicked one of the knights in the head. The enemy flew to the side and dropped the spear from his hands. Yahello shouted at Cindy that they shouldn't go that far. However, the girl did not listen to him and raised the knight again. He jumped out from the dusty curtain, preparing to strike again. The guy understood that this could not go on any longer. He called upon the power of water, which flowed from him to the knight in a thin stream. As soon as the stream reached the enemy, it strengthened and tied up the knight. Yahello rose to his feet and turned to Cindy, asking what she wanted from him. The guy was able to seize the moment and get the stick. Cindy only said that Yahello had hidden potential that she only just realized. The guy said that if things continued like this, he would be forced to go and sort things out with the professor. However, at that moment, Victor seized the opportunity and attacked Yahello from behind. The guy didn't have time to dodge, so he flew into the wall. The force of the impact created a large hole in the wall. Cindy realized that at the last moment, Yahello managed to create a magical barrier. The girl realized that the guy had managed to avoid fatal injuries. Meanwhile, Yahello came to his senses and climbed out of the hole in the wall. The guy leaned his hand on his knee and wiped the blood from his face. Yahello looked at his palm, stained with blood. The guy understood that the water barrier he used could cause harm to himself. Yahello noticed that the room began to fill with electric discharges again. The guy didn't understand what he should do in this situation. In front of him were Victor and Cindy, who apparently were going to kill him. Yahello injured his hand from Victor's blow, so he could no longer hold the wand. Cindy said she would give the guy one last chance to tell everything honestly. The girl asked what plans Asura had. Yahello knew he couldn't escape from behind the barrier, but by using his abilities, he risked exposing himself. However, if he does not use his powers, then he will simply be destroyed. Having received no answer from Yahello, Cindy gave the order to Victor. The guy was standing next to the girl just a second ago, but after her order he disappeared. He appeared near Yahello and was preparing to strike. Victor summoned his chains, which immediately wrapped around his hands like snakes. The boy pointed 4 chains towards Yahello, intending to shackle him. At that moment, one of the knights moved towards Yahello. The guy understood that if he didn't use his power now, he wouldn't need it later. Yahello concentrated on his sealed power. A moment later, the seal was broken. The force allowed Yahello to move quickly and strike. The collision caused the knight's axe to split into pieces. Yahello used the mark of envy called Leviathan on his target. At that very moment, the knight was absorbed by energy and began to dissolve. This time Cindy tensed, realizing how close Yahello had gotten to them. Victor didn't have time to notice how the guy approached him from behind. However, feeling threatened, the guy turned around. At the last moment, Victor managed to conjure chains that held back Yahello's attack. The chains firmly bound the water staff, which the enemy now wielded. Meanwhile, Yahello waved his hand and grabbed the other end of the staff. The guy disconnected it and grabbed it like a dagger. Yahello hit Victor with a backhand before he realized what had happened. The blonde flew to the side, breaking the floor. This time, Yahello called for a second-level release. Cindy looked at Victor and asked if he was okay. The guy, barely able to contain himself because of the pain, replied that he was fine. Cindy looked at Yahello, realizing that he had been hiding his power, which was now causing them serious problems. The girl called the remaining 2 knights to action. They rushed into the attack without hesitation. However, Yahello slipped between them, causing them to turn around. Once behind them, the guy turned around sharply. He stabbed one of the knights in the back of the head with his dagger. While the Leviathan mark was eliminating the enemy, the second knight snuck up behind Yahello. He prepared to pierce the guy with his sword. However, at the very last moment, Yahello noticed him. The streams of water stopped the knight at that very moment. Cindy knew they were going to lose at this rate, so she decided to take radical action. She raised her wand and called upon the mountains and peaks to act at her command, according to the ancient treaty. Cindy commanded thunder and lightning to come to her call. The room seemed to be plunged into complete darkness, illuminated only by discharges of ball lightning. Yahello stepped back a little and prepared to defend himself. Cindy gave the order and a dozen ball lightning bolts rushed towards the guy. They flew past the blonde like shooting stars, leaving behind glowing tails. However, at that moment the forces of nature intervened and filled the room. The chairwoman entered the room and ordered everyone to stop immediately. Lian accused Yahello from all sides, protecting him from ball lightning. The guy heard a voice but didn't see the source, so he started looking around. The sealed door began to glow, attracting his attention. A few moments later, a girl emerged from this light. It was Julia Warist, the chairwoman of Asura Academy. Cindy almost called the girl sister, but then corrected herself, thinking about what brought Julia here. The blonde understood that the chairman should be distracted because she should not find out about everything. Julia didn't buy Cindy's sweet talk and asked why she was picking on the new kids again. The blonde lowered her head and said that she was not bullying Yahello, but just wanted to test how strong he was. Julia looked at Cindy carefully, knowing full well that this was not the main reason for the attack on Yahello. The chairwoman turned to the guy and apologized for the vice president's actions. Yahello was taken aback by her words and turned his gaze to Cindy, who was standing behind Julia. The guy saw the girl's angry look and seemed to read her thoughts. Cindy threatened him with violence with one look if he dared to tell Julia anything. When the blonde looked away, Yahello decided that first of all, he should get out of here as quickly as possible. The guy said that nothing bad had happened and asked if he could go. Julia answered positively and asked Yahello to follow her. Finally, the chairwoman turned to Cindy and said that they were leaving. The blonde didn't dare object and simply watched the guy go. Victor approached Cindy and asked if they were really going to let Yahello go that easily. The girl smiled in response to his words. She said they couldn't allow that. Cindy walked towards the window and said that first they needed to talk to the director of the academy. On the way, she suggested talking about the new guy. Cindy abruptly changed the subject and said that Julia looked beautiful today. As Yahello followed Julia down the hallway, shields appeared from behind the window. The cat jumped on the boy's shoulder and asked why he looked so beaten. Yahello declined to answer this question. Shields noticed Julia walking ahead and asked who she was. Yahello suggested they talk later, and hoped that his identity had not been revealed. In the hallway, they met one of the students who approached Julia and said hello. Addressing the chairman by his last name, the girl said that the teacher was currently in the library and asked Julia to come see him. Hearing Julia's last name, Yahello immediately remembered his grandfather's advice. Even before the boy went to the academy, his grandfather gave him some instructions. The old man handed Yahello a medallion and asked him to give it to the girl from the Warist family. The guy still remembers this and now knows what to do next. Grandfather said that this medallion would help Yahello solve all the riddles. The boy was so lost in thought that he only woke up when Julia called his name several times. The girl apologized to Yahello for the recent incident and promised that she would keep an eye on Cindy in the future. Julia turned around and said that she still had things to do today, so she would go first. Yahello began to dig in his pocket, asking the girl to wait a little. The guy took a medallion out of his pocket and showed it to Julia. He immediately caught the girl's attention, causing her to stop. Yahello asked Julia if this medallion was familiar. The girl took the amulet in her hands and recognized it as a family heirloom. Julia couldn't understand how he could have ended up in Yahello's hands. The girl asked the guy what his name was. The guy said his name was Yahello Oshnas, but the chairman could just call him by his first name. Julia asked if she could take up some of his time, to which Yahello agreed. The girl asked the guy to follow her. Along the way, all the students greeted the chairperson, and she responded to everyone's greetings modestly. Yahello carefully observed the girl's behavior, and was convinced that she was the one he was looking for. Every student was glad to see the girl, but the young guys were embarrassed in front of her. Yahello decided to act according to the situation. Shield said all students, regardless of status, love the president. Yahello couldn't help but agree with this, because even Sandal treated Julia very well, despite her character. Watching Yahello's reaction when Cindy was mentioned, Shields realized that nothing good had happened in the meeting room. The guy changed the subject and reminded them that earlier, when they were in the library, they hadn't been able to find a single mention of Julia. Yahello thought that the reason might be that he simply misread the girl's last name. The boy understood that his grandfather simply could not give them false information. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Julia's voice, who said that they had arrived. The girl pointed to the door and invited Yahello to come inside. The guy found himself in a bright office filled with dark sofas and bookcases. Julia invited the guy to sit down, after which she poured him some tea. The chairwoman sat down opposite the guy and addressed him. The girl asked Yahello to tell her about the amulet he had given her. Julia was interested in how he came into Yahello's hands. Yahello's grandfather was a sea lord, but Yahello's interaction with people on the mainland is a violation of the border agreement. This is why the guy must keep his real identity a secret. Yahello tried to come up with an answer, and said that the elder gave him this amulet. It was clear from Julia's look that she didn't believe him. The girl clutched the medallion and pressed it to her chest, pretending to believe Yahello. However, the guy felt that the atmosphere between them had changed. Yahello decided to say that the elder recommended showing this amulet in case the help of Ms. Warist was needed. Julia said it was a relic from her family that was given to certain people so that they could turn to their family for help at any time. Shields thought that Grandpa High wasn't the only one who had this medallion. However, the ghost could not shake the feeling that Julia was hiding something from them. Yahello said he needed access to the Academy's archived documents at all levels of secrecy, and Julia, as the student council president, could provide it. The girl thought about his request and asked why the guy needed it. Yahello said that he wanted to find one thing, but did not intend anything bad, hoping that the girl would trust the owner of the medallion. There was silence between them for a while as Julia looked at the boy intently. Then the girl nodded her head and said that she could provide access, but only on one condition. Meanwhile, Cindy went to the director of the academy to submit a report. An old man, resembling a spirit, with long white hair, sat in a chair and listened to the girl's report. After some time, Cindy finished the report and let everyone know. Principal Lane Glens didn't even turn to face her, but he said he understood. Cindy said that a new girl named Yahello Oceans might be a member of the press. This time the director became interested and turned his head slightly. He asked if the guy really had anything to do with printing. Cindy thought for a moment, then said she was 90% sure of it. The director ordered the girl to leave it, and was about to say something about Yahello, but stopped. After thinking for a while, the old man told Cindy to do as she wanted. The girl said that she understood everything, after which she announced that she was going to leave. Cindy reached for the door handles and said there was something else bothering her. The girl warned that she would continue to pursue members of the press, and therefore hoped that the director would remember their deal. Cindy asked for more attention to be paid regarding the whereabouts of the chairman of the Warist family. After this, the girl left the director's office, surprising Victor with how little time it took. Cindy was wary of the director's strange attitude towards the newcomer. However, the girl decided to leave this for later and was about to leave. Finally, she ordered Victor to call Leo and Sig. Meanwhile, the director in his office was thinking that Cindy was too young to bear the hatred of the previous generation. At that moment, he noticed that the room began to fill with dark energy. In the shadow of the office, the energy coalesced into one, creating the image of a person. The director reacted calmly to this, as if he were expecting a guest to arrive. The dark spirit greeted the old man, remaining in the shadows. The director turned his cold blue eyes to the spirit and asked if everything was ready for their next steps. A mask appeared from the shadows, and its owner said that they were all set. The director told them to stick to the original plan. The next moment the spirit dispersed, leaving the old man alone with his thoughts again. As soon as Yahello arrived at the academy, the director immediately realized that he was the ruler of the seas. The old man hoped that the boy would not blame him for what would happen. Meanwhile, Julia was in her room wondering who Yahello really was. The girl clutched the medallion in her hand and wondered if the guy could be the one she had been looking for so long. Once upon a time in her childhood, she met a guy who could, but she can no longer remember his face. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a student who entered the room and said that the student council had questions about the academy's competition. Julia looked out the window again and said that she would come now. The library building stood at a distance from the academy itself and was covered with thick vines. Yahello came to the library and looked at the huge building in which he would spend a lot of time. The guy remembered the saying, "He who does not work, does not eat." During their conversation with Julia, the girl said that the library needed workers, but the student council was too busy. The chairperson promised to give Yahello partial access to the archives if he volunteered. The boy was still deciding whether it was worth spending time on this. But at that moment, one of the teachers called him. The man approached Yahello and asked if he was the one Julia had recommended to them. Having received a positive answer, the teacher invited the boy to follow him to the library. Approaching the bookshelves, the man said that the person responsible for sorting the books had not returned, so they needed the student's help. The teacher pointed to the books that needed to be sorted, and then went off to do his own thing. Yahello sighed heavily when he saw the huge stacks of books on the table. The guy assumed that it would not be as easy as he expected. Shields changed back to her human form and said it felt like Julia was punishing him. The guy thought about the girl's words for a few moments. However, afterward he hit her on the head with a book and said that instead of laughing, she could help him. Shields said Yahello just doesn't understand how she feels. The girl said that since she became a ghost, she cannot touch anyone except Yahello. The guy said that in that case, the girl should stay put and not make a mess. At some point, a roar caught their attention. The girl couldn't hold the books in her hands and fell. She had long blue hair and red eyes. When she fell, her glasses flew off her head and now she couldn't find them. Yahello walked over and picked up the girl's glasses. The guy handed them to the stranger, asking if they were what she was looking for. The girl accepted them with gratitude and admitted that without glasses, she saw everything as if in a fog. Putting on her glasses, the stranger looked at Yahello and thanked him for his help. The guy asked if the girl was okay and if she had sustained any injuries during the fall. She didn't answer, amazed by the beauty of the guy standing in front of her. The girl's nose even started bleeding from embarrassment. Feeling this, the stranger jumped to her feet, bowed several times, thanking for the help. The guy said that he needed to pick up all the books from the floor, but the girl quickly stopped him. The girl said that she, as a teacher, could handle it on her own. With a light spell, she was able to lift all the books from the floor and take them into her hands again. The teacher said that the boy didn't need to worry about it and should focus on his work. Shields and Yahello watched the strange teacher for a while. As the boy was about to continue sorting books, he kicked something on the floor. Yahello crouched down and picked up a strange stone from the floor. It had Campbell Megamot written on it. Yahello immediately realized that the stone had just fallen out of the teacher's pocket. Shields said the boy should return it to its owner. However, Yahello reported that the second floor, which the girl had climbed to, was protected by a magical formation, and that one could not enter there without permission. The boy looked at the stone carefully and said that they would wait until the teacher came down and then give it to her. By the time Yahello finished his work, it was already deep night outside. The guy walked out of the library and stretched, relaxing his stiff muscles. Yahello turned towards the building and said that the teacher still hadn't come out. Shields said she was tired today, so she offered to give the stone another time. Yahello suggested that the girl might have left through another exit, and therefore remained unnoticed. The guy said that they would return here tomorrow and would probably meet again. All this time, someone was watching them from the library tower. It was a follower of the press. He was wearing a mask with a blue monocle. At some point, he noticed movement from the forest and was afraid that he might be noticed. To avoid attracting unnecessary attention, the press follower disappeared. Returning home, Shields asked Yahello how the teacher knew his name, even though it was their first meeting. But they were unable to figure out the issue. Walking towards them were two students from the Flame faculty, one with black hair, named Sieg Slaughter, and the other with red hair, named Leo Flane. The boys were obviously looking for Yahello, so the guy asked who they were. Leo ignored his question and asked his friend if the night was wonderful, to which he received a positive answer. Hilo thought it was strangely similar to déjà vu, but he still didn't understand what the problem was. The next moment, a fiery glow began to emanate from Leo, and the guy said that it was a dark and windy night. Fiery energy concentrated above his head, and Leon said that the day of murder and arson had come. Hilo did not wait for his end and ran. He guessed who exactly might have sent for him, but there was no time to confirm his guesses. The boy jumped over the rocky barrier with dexterity. Jumping out from behind the foliage, the boy noticed something flash ahead. Hilo thought he saw a person, but the silhouette immediately disappeared into the night. The guy noticed a flame flashing behind him. At the last moment, he was able to dodge to the side, preventing the stream of fire from hitting him. The stream was so strong that it cut through the night darkness. After a few moments, the fire died out, leaving a hole in the clouds. Hilo landed on the ground, followed by Shields, whose dress caught fire. The boy thought that Leo was clearly controlling the elf of the ancient flame, Jukayaro. Hilo was surprised that the elf was serving a man, because he had always served only the circle of the black flame of the dragon. By this time, Leo and Zig had managed to catch up with the guy. Although Leo was out of breath from running, he was glad that he had managed to catch up with Hilo. The guy called for fire again and said that this time the guy would not be able to escape. A huge stream of fire rushed towards Hilo, destroying the ground underfoot. However, the closer he got, the deeper he went underground, and soon he disappeared completely. Hilo wondered how this could have happened. However, the next moment he realized that this was Leo's plan, as the ground beneath his feet began to heat up. Hilo stepped back a little, and the next second a beam of fire burst out of the ground. The guy realized that from the very beginning Leo had planned to carry out an attack from underground. The red-haired man hissed in frustration when the beam missed its target. Shields, meanwhile, was extremely angry about Leo's actions. She didn't want his attacks to set her dress on fire again, which she had barely managed to put out. The girl flew up to Hilo and asked him to give her a chance to teach Leo a lesson, but the guy told her to hide. Hilo wanted to avoid all the trouble, but Leo and Zig wouldn't let him go, so it was time to fight. However, at that moment, Shields was in his way, hanging on to him. The guy told her to hide again, but she stubbornly did not want to let him go. Hilo tried to pull the girl away from him, but he was unsuccessful, as she wrapped her arms and legs around him. Shields said she didn't want the boy to get hurt again, so she had to help him. Hilo froze in confusion and asked what this meant. Instead of answering, the girl began to complain that her legs were already swollen. Leo and Zig watched as Hilo fought with something and assumed he was talking to the air. The red-haired man fenced off his friend and told him to stand aside while he sorted out Hilo himself. Leo stepped forward and called upon the elf Jukayaro again, saying that Hilo had gotten himself into trouble. For a few moments the elf turned blue, glowing and gathering strength. The next moment he fired another beam of fire. Hilo did not want to harm the ancient elves until the very end, but he had no choice. The bracelet on the guy's hand started working on its own, surrounding him with streams of water. To deflect the blow, Hilo raised his hand, putting forward a water shield. Fiery energy flowed through the water, going behind the guy's back. Hilo noticed how the air around him began to warm up, despite the water. From the mixing of the elements, the guy saw sparks, which made him think about an explosion. The next moment, an explosion occurred behind him, distracting him from his defense. Victor and Cindy watched all this from a distance. They sat on the branch of a tall tree and watched the flashes of fire in the forest. Victor asked the girl if they were in a hurry, since it could have been the smell of a seal, and not the lock they were looking for. Cindy dismissed the idea, convinced that she had smelled the castle. However, there were some doubts in the girl's head, because this smell was much stronger than the previous ones. They couldn't find out in the academy building, but now they're outside, so Cindy hopes that Hilo won't disappoint her. Meanwhile, the fire from the explosion died down, and now Hilo could cough. The guy didn't understand how this explosion could have happened at all. At that moment, Hilo remembered Shields, who had been behind him earlier, so the explosion could have hit her. However, turning around, he saw a contented girl sitting on the ground, safe and sound. Hilo looked at her disapprovingly and said that everything was as good as ever. Leo laughed so loudly that it couldn't help but attract the guy's attention. The red-haired man said that the guy hit his head so hard that he continues to talk to the air. Leo smiled and said that it would be nice to send him to hell. The boy waved his wand and summoned the elf again, saying that it wouldn't be difficult. Leo called the elf by name, causing him to heat up again, turning blue. However, this time, an obstacle in the form of a huge boulder appeared in the path of the fiery beam. The beam hit him, but the stone remained in place, absorbing the impact. After a few moments, the energy began to overflow and splash in different directions, brightly illuminating the night forest. Hilo didn't understand what exactly blocked the enemy's attack. Leo looked ahead in surprise. The boulder became hot, and when the fiery beam died down, it began to rapidly descend to the ground. The ground shook and shattered as the boulder landed. A man in a robe landed on the very top of the stone. Hilo felt like he knew this man. His energy was similar to what the guy had been feeling lately. Hilo wondered if this could be the very castle that everyone was looking for. Meanwhile, the demonic space was in turmoil. Their world was chained, holding back the local inhabitants. The chess game continued, and the demon with the blue mask said that Cindy Sandal had already met with Yahello Oshness. The demon with the red mask said that setting the guy up would distract Sandal's attention for a while. The blue demon said that they were one step closer to their goal. The red demon asked the chief demon whether they could count on success this time. The cloaked demon stroked the snake's head and said there was no need to worry. This time he sent one of the 7, a manipulator named the 6th doll. It was the manipulator who now stood between Leo and Yahello. The masked man turned to face the sea god, his eyes glittering from behind his mask. Yahello smelled black magic as soon as the stranger revealed himself. Leo asked the stranger where he came from and whether he had come to save Yahello. However, the masked man did not answer, continuing to stare at the god of the seas. Leo immediately suspected that this was a man from the new organization that Cindy was hunting. The guy remembered that the girl had ordered him to retreat if they showed up, but he believed that he alone would be enough to deal with everything. Seeing Leo attack, the stranger responded with a stream of water. Flame and water collided, not letting each other through. However, instead of the expected evaporation, the streams broke up. At that moment, there was another explosion. Yahello watched this from the sidelines and didn't understand why this happened again. The masked man said that water obtained through magic does not boil even when heated very quickly. The stranger said that if you add a little dust to a fire, it will create an explosion, which is a combination of fire and earth magic. Leo realized that his plan had been seen through and said that it was very clever. Only Yahello could not understand what was being said. Since he often slept during classes, he did not absorb any information about combination magic. The man in the robe said he was very sorry, and then took out his scythe. A flash of purple light flashed through the air. With one blow of his scythe, the stranger cut Leo across the torso. The masked man said the guy was too inattentive. Leo couldn't understand what had happened, because the enemy was so close in an instant. The guy also didn't know why the fire elf, who was under his command, didn't stop the attack. Leo saw the blood and the laughing mask of his enemy, and panic began to overwhelm him. He felt like he was suffocating and couldn't figure out what to do next. The guy screamed so loudly that his own ears became blocked. However, all this was happening only in his head. Zig was hiding behind one of the trees and saw that Leo couldn't move, but the black fog made it impossible to understand the reason. An image of a dragon appeared in the boy's head and said something to him. Zig moved towards his friend as if under a spell. Swiftly approaching Leo, the guy asked what happened to him. Zig shook the guy by the shoulders, but he remained motionless, as if he didn't notice anything around him. Leo's eyes were staring into space, as if his soul had left his body. The masked man said that Zig's actions were useless, since the guy wouldn't hear him anyway, no matter how loud he shouted. The stranger said that only he could awaken Leo from the illusions of the black fog. However, Zig was of interest to the masked man, as he had been in the black fog from the very beginning, but was still conscious. The young man demanded that the stranger return Leo immediately. Zig was clearly frightened by what was happening, but tried to threaten. The stranger put his hand forward and said that the guy was too noisy. Hundreds of dark threads burst from his palm and rushed towards Zig. They wrapped tightly around the boy's neck, lifting him off the ground. The masked man thanked Zig for coming back so he wouldn't have to hunt him all over the forest. The guy tried to free himself from the threads, but he couldn't do it. With the last of his strength, Zig demanded that his friend be released. The stranger asked if this was really what he would say at last. The masked man laughed and then said goodbye to the guy, intending to kill him. However, something quickly approached from the side and cut off the threads along with the hand of the man in the mask. The stranger was surprised and did not understand how this happened. Yahello stopped standing on the sidelines and rushed into battle, materializing his sword. The guy demanded that Zig and Leo be released. When the threads disappeared, Zig fell to the ground. The guy looked in shock at Yahello, who stood up for them. The stranger's severed hand fell to the ground. The masked man jumped away from Yahello to avoid another attack. The stranger clutched his shoulder and looked at his severed hand. The masked man addressed Yahello with a shaking voice. The guy stood in place, ready to join the fight at any moment. The stranger became very angry and screamed at the top of his voice. The cry caught the attention of Cindy and Victor, who could only see the glow of energy in the forest. The girl said it was time to join. Cindy jumped out of the tree and Victor followed her. The girl thought that Leo and Zig should have retreated as she ordered them, but this did not happen. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. Rushing towards the battle, the girl hoped that Zig and Leo would not cause her any unnecessary trouble. Meanwhile, the masked man praised Yahello for not only being able to get through the black fog, but also taking advantage of the opportunity to wound him. The stranger said that the guy was really too annoying. The masked man summoned the severed hand to himself and said that their plan was to keep Yahello alive for a while. The hand, driven by threads of dark energy, returned to its place, and the stranger noted that the guy could create big problems for them. That's why the masked man decided to make his own decision that Yahello needed to be gotten rid of. Yahello noticed a Triskelion pattern on his arm. The guy asked if the stranger was the castle that everyone was looking for. The stranger said that she considered the existence of the castle a continental secret, and that one would need to have enormous power to know about it. The masked man decided to drop the question of Yahello's origins, and asked why the boy was helping Leo and Zig, who had attacked him. The guy replied that it didn't matter. Yahello glanced briefly at Zig, who was dragging the unconscious Leo into the forest. The guy assumed that these two were related to the ancient flame. Zig's eye was glowing, and a voice in his head suggested that Cindy might have given them the wrong information about Yahello. Earlier that day, the blonde ordered Leo and Zig to attack Yahello outside the academy and lure out his accomplice. The red-haired man was not happy with being entrusted with such boring things, but he still agreed. Before the guys left Cindy's office, the girl asked Zig to stay. The blonde asked if the guy would let her talk to the one inside him. They both understood that they were talking about the black fire dragon Raikunila. Returning to the events of that night, Zig's body is currently controlled by a dragon that Cindy asked to protect the boys. However, Raikunil could not shake off the feeling that he knew Yahello. At that moment, the guy was talking to the stranger and asked why he was following them and why the castle was trying to get into the academy. The man in the cloak said he would tell Yahello some information if he could survive. The castle follower waved his hand, and many streams of dark energy were directed towards the boy. They were like needles trying to pierce the guy's body. However, Yahello easily avoided the collision. The threads became even thinner and changed their direction. Yahello understood that the faster he moved, the more the castle follower got angry. The guy struck the threads only once and they recoiled from him in different directions. For a few moments, the attack stopped, causing Yahello to become wary. The guy quickly noticed the movement behind him and jumped to the side. Yahello thought that these black threads could immediately predict his attacks. However, he immediately dismissed this idea, because then they could act preemptively. So the question remained as to what kind of magic his opponent was using. Yahello understood that the enemy was controlling the threads from afar. However, the castle follower showed no signs of control, and there were no traces of magic. The confusion on Yahello's face made the stranger laugh. He laughed at the boy's attempts to escape from the threads. The masked man knew that as long as the victim experienced any emotion, he would never be able to escape the threads. It doesn't matter what kind of emotions they are, because all the most tender or cruel emotions are deeply woven into people's lives and control them. These threads are invisible to normal people, and only the person in the mask can see them, so he can control them using a little magic. When Yahello cut off his arm, he attached his threads to the boy's arm to track his movements. The magic of the attached threads will gradually attract other threads, increasing their number. Their numbers will increase until Yahello is completely under his control. Yahello noticed that the threads were not calming down, and thought that this fight might never end if things continued like this. The guy decided that since he couldn't attack these threads, he would simply ignore them. Yahello dodged the threads heading towards him and rushed forward. The threads slashed across the ground and rushed after the guy. Yahello decided to ignore the threads and focus on the caster. The guy quickly approached the masked man and was about to strike. However, the castle follower stood still, as if he had no intention of repelling the attack. In an instant, a wall of threads appeared between them. Yahello struck, but was unable to penetrate them and reach the enemy. While he was distracted by the blow, the threads that had been pursuing him appeared in front of him and curved. They hit Yahello in the stomach, pushing him back. The boy thrust his sword into the ground to stop. The masked man remained motionless the entire time. When Yahello managed to stop, he decided to catch his breath. The guy couldn't get close to the enemy, so first he had to figure out how to deal with the threads. Yahello's power was limited after the release of their relic, which greatly irritated him. At some point, the guy realized that the movement of the threads not long ago had been very strange. They suddenly curved, just as he jerked his hand to dodge the attack. The guy thought that the threads could repeat his movements. Remembering all the times the threads changed direction, Yahello realized that they were moving behind his right hand. The masked man said the boy's abilities were impressive. However, his attacks did not end there and the threads again rushed towards Yahello. The guy realized that he had no other choice but to use his left hand. Yahello intercepted the sword and struck the threads with his left hand, cutting them into pieces. The boy heard the voice of the castle's follower, who was now much closer. Turning around, he saw a masked man preparing to strike with a scythe. He said that Yahello shouldn't have forgotten about him. Before the scythe reached Yahello, a flash of lightning cut through the night. Cindy appeared on the battlefield and kicked her opponent in the face. The impact caused the mask on the castle follower's face to crumble. The enemy flew to the side. Cindy said this was the fight she had been waiting for. The girl had been pursuing the masked man for a long time and now she has found him. The follower rose to his feet and wondered what Cindy Sandal was doing in this place. The girl said that she did not expect to see here the sixth puppet, who stole the secret of the sea during their last meeting. Yahello heard familiar words and realized that he couldn't find the seal in the library because it had already been stolen before him. Cindy looked at Yahello and said that Zig had already told her everything. She thanked the guy for helping his friend when he needed it. Cindy warned that she would still be wary of Yahello until she was completely sure of him. Now Cindy and Yahello had to fight together against their common enemy. The girl said that their opponent was one of the most problematic, the sixth puppet. Meanwhile, Shields remained in a remote part of the forest. The girl fell asleep in a tree and was so motionless that the birds landed on her. Shields didn't notice that the stone she and Yahello had picked up in the library had begun to glow. According to history, the last time the demon was suppressed was hundreds of years ago, and although it was not possible to kill it, it was sealed with the help of 7 sacred artifacts. These artifacts were infused with the power of the gods, after which the 7 gods kept the artifacts for themselves. However, with the passage of time and the change of gods, the seal gradually disappeared. Just recently, news began to spread from Asgard to other memorial sites. The previous sea gods sensed the seal's weakening, which is why Yahello came to the academy to find the seal and the object that was sealed. Based on Cindy's words, it can be concluded that the secret of the sea was taken away by the 6th doll. And if you defeat him, you can find out the location of the thing you are looking for. The enemy, however, was not going to wait to be killed, so he used the puppet technique, Killer Explosion. Cindy saw that Yahello was deep in thought and called him. The guy quickly came to his senses, but he had no time to defend himself. Cindy stepped forward and blocked them with an electric barrier. A dense stream of threads crashed into the shield and went around it. Yahello saw that the shadows surrounded them on all sides, and as soon as the shield fell, they would be caught in this net. Cindy told the guy to listen to her carefully. The girl said that even if they joined forces, defeating the puppet would be too difficult, so they needed to find another way. Cindy looked around and asked if the guy saw the black and blue stone. Yahello looked around and realized that they were talking about the stone that had fallen along with the puppet. The girl said that it was a limit stone that created its own area of enchantment. At Asgard Academy, the entire area is surrounded by a powerful barrier erected by the director, and this barrier is one of the methods of external protection. Due to the simultaneous use of magical barriers, direct magic in the form of ocean, thunder, earth, hurricane, fire, and forest elements will be suppressed. The limit stone is capable of overcoming magical barriers and forcibly opening the boundaries of attributes. Cindy said that in the doll dimension, their chances of winning were 0, so the limit stone had to be destroyed and then, using the director's magic, the puppet had to be suppressed. Yahello thought that the girl wanted him to destroy the stone. However, Cindy said that she would destroy it herself. The girl said that she had more experience in breaking these stones, so Yahello would have to take on the puppet's attacks. The guy thought that they had no choice but to cooperate. Yahello said that the black threads were preventing him from attacking, but Cindy said that she would deal with them, and the guy would have to deal with the puppet at that moment. The girl said that he would only have 10 seconds before new threads appeared, so the guy had to manage in that time. Yahello said he had fought these threads before, and was unsure if combining forces would work. Cindy said the guy was good at close combat, but the puppet preferred to torture his victim with threads and then reap the harvest. In other words, their opponent is weak in close combat, so Yahello will have to rely on the girl. The guy understood that he had no choice but to trust Cindy. Hearing Yahello's agreement, the girl smiled. Cindy told him to prepare for attack. The next moment, she removed the shield, and she and Yahello ran in different directions. The puppet realized that they were going to split up and attack from different sides. The enemy had foreseen this, and a moment before India appeared, set up a targeting line. Yahello, in accordance with their plan, ran away from the threads and hoped that Cindy would keep her word. Running to the side, the girl gave a signal to Victor and Zig. At this time, the blonde was sitting in the shade of the trees, preparing to attack. Having received the signal, he took action. Victor activated a thunder barrier around the battlefield. Zig knew they couldn't wait too long and activated the fire barrier. The two elements combined to form a barrier on the battlefield. The forces merged into one, shining even brighter. The puppet realized that he was in the center of a reinforced barrier of thunder and fire magic. The opponent believed that the student was trying to restrict his movements in this way. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that there must be something else that he was missing. As he ran away from the threads, Yahello noticed that their direction had shifted and they were no longer following him exactly. The guy didn't understand how Cindy managed to do it. The girl understood that the main problem in eliminating the puppet was the invisible magical threads, and although they were weak, getting rid of them was extremely difficult. There are currently no conditions to destroy the threads, but you can try something else. When a huge barrier is formed, a wave of magical power will surge, and the two elements, fighting with each other, will scatter the threads in all directions. However, after only 10 seconds, the magical power will become stable, and the threads will be able to unite again. So they and Yahello only have one chance. The puppet noticed that Cindy, unlike Yahello, headed straight for the limit stone. The enemy realized that the girl had chosen the stone as her target. The puppet stretched out his hand and thought about how he would not let them succeed. However, he was interrupted by Leo's voice, which summoned a fiery chaos. The puppet again felt the chaotic flow of magic that was knocking down his strings. Once outside the black fog, Leo gradually came to his senses and began to help Victor and Zig build the barrier. The guy was very exhausted, but he couldn't help but help his friends. Cindy noticed his efforts and praised Leo. Taking advantage of the puppet's hesitation, the girl summoned the Thunder Universe. The clouds parted and a powerful bolt of lightning pierced the limit stone. The stone crumbled from the impact. Gradually, no trace remained of the stone, as if it had dissolved into thin air, turning into dust. The puppet's strings faltered and thinned. The enemy felt these vibrations, but did not understand where they were coming from. At that moment, his consciousness was carried away by threads to the Academy Castle. They brought him straight to the director of the Academy, who was sitting in his office. The old man used his powers to restore the territory. The puppet felt the director's power suppressing his magic. Cindy sensed it too and gave Yahello the signal to act. At that moment, the guy tightly gripped the sword in his hands and addressed the souls living in the ocean. He called upon them to awaken from the cracks in the abyss and appear before him. It was his order, in the name of the sea god. Yahello realized that he was getting closer to his goal, and now all that remained was to take the seal from the puppet. Cindy gave the guy a signal and he rushed forward. He understood that there was no way he could lose this battle. The puppet felt his strings being blocked. However, he could still attack randomly, but even with this setup, Yahello acted too quickly. The puppet realized that the boy had increased his speed through thunder magic. In an instant, Yahello found himself very close to the enemy, but he still behaved calmly. The puppet struck the guy with its strings, but his silhouette immediately dissolved into tongues of flame. This time the enemy was at a loss, as he realized that he, the master of illusions, had been deceived by a fiery illusion. At that moment, the real Yahello came behind him and raised his blade to strike. The guy already thought that they had managed to defeat the enemy. For a few moments the puppet lost concentration. The next second, there was an explosion from the collision of energies. Cindy looked at the source of the explosion in anticipation, trying to figure out if their plan had worked. However, the dust gradually began to settle, and the girl froze in place. Yahello's blade intertwined tightly with the puppet's strings, creating two colliding barriers. Yahello didn't understand why they hadn't succeeded, since the limit stone had been destroyed, and the director's magic should have defeated the enemy. Puppet praised the student for his teamwork, but noted that their attacks were too soft. Yahello didn't understand what the masked man was getting at. The puppet asked if they really believed there was only one limit stone. The enemy said that his mask was also made of the limit stone. Stepping a little to the side, the puppet suggested that Yahello look around. When the guy slowed down, the threads had time to entangle him from all sides. His legs were tied so tightly that he could not take a step to the side. The puppet said that such a magical barrier would not be able to weaken him. And even before the battle began, he cast his magical illusions on this place. The masked man said that there was no point in expecting help from Cindy, as she had already fallen into the trap of his illusions. The puppet suggested that Yahello calmly plunge into eternal sleep in this swampy dark zone. At that moment, a bright light came from the direction of the forest. The white light flew straight towards the cocoon of threads that surrounded and captured Yahello. It was the spirit of a girl with snow-white hair. She walked up to the cocoon and placed her hand on it. The girl turned to the puppet and called him Kanper with a smile. The masked man's eyes widened in shock. He immediately recognized the girl he had known a long time ago. A bright white light burst from the spirit's chest. It filled the entire forest, illuminating it like the sun. A huge pillar of energy shot into the sky. Some time before this, the puppet came to the director of the academy and said that this time the students could be seriously harmed by their actions. The director handed the masked man a magic stone and told him to give it to a guy named Yahello. The puppet immediately recognized the secret of the sea in the stone and asked why Yahello should receive it. The director said that the guy should have protected it from the beginning, so they are just returning it to its original owner. The old man said that he also just wanted to confirm his suspicions. He entrusted this task to a puppet, under whose mask the teacher Kanper was hiding. Returning to the events of the battle, Yahello began to slowly come to his senses. The threads gradually released him, giving him the opportunity to look around. In front of him he saw a puppet whose mask began to disintegrate. The enemy said that this time he would let the guy go, but he promised that they would meet again soon. After this, the mask finally disintegrated and fell onto the robe, in which there was no longer a person. For some time the guy looked at the things left by the enemy. Yahello realized that the puppet had simply run away. However, the whole time the guy was in a cocoon, so he didn't understand what had happened during his absence. The director felt the light from his office that pierced the night, and realized that the man had made the right choice. The old man believed that the previous head of the demon seal, the light celestial, should also be next to Yahello. This girl's name was Sea Ersi. Meanwhile, in a remote part of the forest, two men in cloaks were watching what was happening. The silver-haired man was clearly interested in what he saw that night. He told his companion that their trip had not been in vain. When the fight was over, a tired Yahello returned to his room in the 7th dormitory of the academy. Lying on the bed, the guy thought that the puppet obviously had an absolute advantage over them. One more blow could have taken their lives, but it didn't happen. Yahello could not free himself from the threads that had sealed him inside like a trap. However, at some point, a bright light began to shine through them. Even in the darkness created by the threads, this light cut the guy's eyes. Yahello struggled to see what was emitting that glow. He saw the silhouette of a girl who was radiating this light, but the guy didn't know her. Yahello thought that the limit stone had arrived from Asura, but there were still 6 seals that needed to be found urgently. Immediately after the battle, Yahello asked Cindy, who had come to her senses, if she had seen anyone strange there. The girl examined the crumbled puppet mask and said that before the battle began, a magical barrier was installed through which no one could get through. Cindy said she would have felt an intrusion, but nothing of the sort happened. Her words made Yahello think that the girl was just his illusion. Cindy glanced over her shoulder at the thoughtful guy. Standing up, she said that it was time to stop this talk about the puppet. The girl said she would like to talk about Yahello. Cindy asked if the guy was really just a regular newbie at the academy. Yahello tensed, not understanding what to expect from the girl. Cindy said that the guy's abilities were far beyond the average student, and even the seniors couldn't resist him. The girl already understood that the guy had nothing to do with the new organization, but she was still interested in his past and intentions. However, Yahello never answered her questions. The girl looked at the guy, who was very exhausted from the battle and had received many wounds. Cindy decided to leave this conversation, and referred to the fact that she still needed to take Leo and Zig for treatment, and Yahello himself needed to treat his wounds. The girl told the guy to come to the courtroom tomorrow to discuss these issues again. Cindy held up a finger with lightning flashing on the tip, and said that if he didn't come, it would be worse for him. After this, the girl left, leaving Yahello alone with his thoughts. The boy breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he would have time to think about his answers. Only now did Yahello remember Shields, who at that moment must have been hiding somewhere in the forest, although she had previously very actively expressed her intentions to fight. Now, being in the dorm room, Yahello was sure that the girl was not an illusion. However, the guy put his thoughts aside for tomorrow, as he was too tired today. After the battle, Yahello was able to find Shields, but she disappeared again somewhere along the way. The girl no longer responded to the call of his heart, and this began to worry him. At that moment, Yahello's neighbor entered the room. It was a guy with short white hair named Sora. The neighbor just came out of the bath and asked why Yahello came home so late. Sora asked if his late return was due to him finding something to do to entertain himself. Yahello replied that he had gone to the library to check out some materials, as there were many things he did not understand. Sora agreed that some of the things the professor said were indeed confusing. The blonde walked up to the table and took a piece of paper from it. Sora told his neighbor that someone from the student council gave it to him. Yahello sat up in bed and accepted the letter. The guy realized that this was an application form for participation in a major competition. However, Yahello did not understand what academic competitions were being discussed. Sora said that their academy holds this competition every year, and even first-year students can participate. Sora said that this time there would be something unusual, because they would open a secret tower where a ghost lives, and as a prize, the winner would be taught special magic. Despite all the positive aspects of participating, Yahello refused. Turning to the wall, the guy said that as a newbie he had no chance of winning, so he was not going to take part in something of such a large scale. Sora became upset and admitted that he was going to form a team with his neighbor. The neighbor also noted that Yahello smelled bad, so he couldn't just go to bed without going to the bathroom, which would soon be closed. It was the dead of night outside, but Yahello still went out onto the roof to try calling Shields again. Sora had long since fallen asleep and was not expecting his neighbor to return. This time, Shields answered her friend's call. The guy said that he had been looking for the girl everywhere for a long time, and did not expect that she would be sitting on the roof and watching the forest. Yahello asked what Shields was looking at so intently. The guy understood that something was really bothering the girl, and that was why she was acting so strangely. Shields asked the boy to listen to her and suggested that he leave Asura Academy immediately.